Thank you very much for enabling me to be part of your great celebrations. I'm new to Tux, coming from Wits after working there for about 30 years, and I must say it's been wonderful to be here at this wonderful university. It's also great to be a partner with Lorenzo because we have a kind of a tag situation. I get him to come and talk to physical scientists, and then he drags me kicking and screaming to come and talk to social scientists. He also told me that there are 3 criteria for why I qualified to give this plenary. The one is that I had to be a crazy scientist from a different discipline, which I qualify on. The other is that I need to be able to reflect on my discourse and to ultimately be part of that old group who sit in smoky rooms, smoking cigars, contemplating our discourse in a very reflexive way. Unfortunately, I don't qualify on that case. But then he also suggested that perhaps if we did that, we might earn a Nobel Prize. And for those sins, I do have a little piece of a Nobel Prize for my work that I did in climate change. So I hope I qualify to give this talk. I wish I could also clap my hands and whisper and bring rain, because I think those are the key issues that I'd like to reflect on this afternoon. Unfortunately, I don't think I can make you laugh too much because the issues I want to talk about, I think, are quite serious. But I want to just very, very briefly, I wasn't allowed, he said I shouldn't use any PowerPoints, which is hard for a physical scientist. So I'm going to just talk, and I'm going to talk in a couple of contexts. What I'd like to raise, we've heard already about the Great Zimbabwe fall and demise and the factors that led to that. What I'd like to do is couch my closing remarks just very briefly in a need for trying to do some different kind of science. The questions that I deal with, for example, climate change, may be basically termed a huge wicked problem. A wicked problem is something that's very difficult to clearly define if you read the work of Rittel and Weber. It usually has many interdependencies and is often multi-scaled. It leads to unforeseen consequences. It usually has no clear solution, and it's socially very complex. These kinds of problems, like climate change, are normally different to what may be called tame problems. That doesn't mean that they're lesser in terms of the level of science required, but they tend to be agreed upon problems that people work with. There's very little contestation, and you have a desired end. So, for example, a vaccine may be used to solve some kind of health issue. Your end goal is quite clear, and you've got a fairly good agreement on various protocols in what you're using. But when we come to something like climate change, and I would argue it is a really huge and super wicked problem, we have a major concern, and let me give me reasons why. Climate change in Africa is a big issue. Africa at the moment, we can look at the statistics. Our temperature is increasing about 0.5 degrees in the last 50 to 100 years. Rainfall is quite problematic. We can't really give you certainty there, so hence one of the reasons why this is one of these complex, wicked challenges. And the impacts, as you can imagine, are a consequence of being overlaid onto a range of other issues, for example, HIV, poverty, and the inability to cope. So it's the intersection of these issues that is also being heightened by issues like conflict. And I've just returned from Washington, where the United States government are taking seriously and very great concern in Africa because they believe climate change may be a threat multiplier. But so what do we do about it? And why is it a super wicked problem? And I would argue, and I don't want to make you all get depressed. I hope we will have some drinks. So I don't want to lead you all to go off and have a drink. But it is a super wicked problem because today, if you switch on your TV tonight when you go home, there's a huge meeting in New York City where Ban Ki-moon and Leonardo DiCaprio are leading a call to get society involved around trying to solve this big wicked problem. And the reason why we would say we've elevated it now just from a wicked problem to a super problem is because time is running out. We need to get to an agreement at the end of next year to keep climate change below 2 degrees, because who knows what the consequences might be. May they be similar to Zimbabwe or not? Time will only tell. So time is running out. That's what makes this a super wicked problem. And those who are causing the problem are also seeking to provide a solution. But unfortunately, and this is where the humanities, I'm sure, would find interest, the authorities that are required to address this problem are usually weak or non-existent. So the central role of the state is something that's quite interesting. And then the irrational discounting that occurs when we try and push the responses into the future. And I know Lorenzo and I have been talking quite a lot about the governance dimensions. How do you solve something like climate change, which is such a big problem, going out into the future, which is 2050, maybe 2060, when institutions are trying to handle some very real problems at the moment? So you might ask yourself, why did I title my talk, Lost in Translation, Opportunities in Transition? I would like to urge this university and those of you who are interested to come and join me on a journey, because I don't believe that our science will actually solve these problems unless we start to transition towards each other and try and find responses that we can use mutually together. The types of solutions that we require are very much some of the issues that have been raised by previous speakers. We cannot use just single focus points with linear thinking or in silos. We need to use holistic and innovative and flexible approaches. So while my science can offer some ways of thinking technologically about it, I do think it's really in the domain that you in this room can offer that can really bring these issues to perhaps some kind of solution. Because it's really about the changes in policy and management, the governance issues that Lorenzo fights for. And I'm quite fortunate to be working on a committee with Lorenzo and others in the university where we're trying to look at what might this new science or this additional science look like. Some have called it sustainability science, others have called it convergence science. How can we bring ourselves together to talk across these issues? So ladies and gentlemen, I don't want to take up too much more of your time. I just want to say that it's been a deep honor for me to sit and listen to some very sensitive presentations, and I wish I could also throw my pieces of paper out onto the floor so that you could all rush out and pick them up, because I do have some quite interesting ones that I could throw, but they might cause some damage. So I would urge you to have a look at the World Social Science Report, which a colleague of mine internationally is looking at in terms of climate change, and also some of the climate change issues where we're now trying to work with the humanities in a much, much closer way. So to conclude, I'd just like to end by saying the issues that we're dealing with in Africa, including climate change, is a super wicked problem. It's messy. It's socially very messy. It's not like a tame problem. It's very untamed. And we need to be bringing that discourse that we deal with in terms of climate change head and shoulders, if you like, and abutting the dynamic social and political factors that those of you who sit in this room deal with. We need to work with a range of actors, including people sitting outside the university, with a range of approaches, for example, using discourse analysis, dispute resolution, models, etc. But my big question when I came to Tux, because I left Wits trying to do this kind of work, is, are we brave enough? Because unfortunately the system doesn't reward you if you work in this divide or trying to bridge this divide. You tend to get higher ratings if you work in a much more siloed approach. And yet, unfortunately, the world is presenting us with these big, wicked problems, and we've heard some of the others this evening as well, or this afternoon. So as there's a tried old saying, if I could end my little presentation, the world has problems, wicked ones, that I've tried to share with you, and unfortunately, universities have departments. And that's good. We need the departments, we need the blue sky research, but I would argue that increasingly we're going to try and have to find these transition points. We can no longer just do our science, put it in a box or in a reservoir for politicians to pick up. We are going to need to try and do some of this transitioning. And it's a hard ask. It's not easy to do that. So, unfortunately, I hopefully wasn't too serious, and I would love to have chatted to Chesterton and find out if there are lighter ways to resolve this. But I'd like to just end with another saying by Marcel Proust, who says, the real voyage of discovery is not in seeking new landscapes, but in having new eyes and possibly also new ears. We need to be listening to each other, talking to each other to try and address these wicked problems. I would like to congratulate all those of you who won such prestigious awards, and thank again Lorenzo very much for putting me on the spot to have not a cigar, but just to air my thoughts in what is not really a stuffy room. Thank you very, very much.